guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and when it comes to Midnight Alpha, we've seen a bunch of new class changes over on the development realms for the next new expansion. Many classes are going through a huge number of reworks and revamps and so many talents and playstyle changes that it kind of just makes your head spin. Out of all the different classes, however, there's only one that it looks like is getting a refresher, not quite a revamp, and that'll be the class of Monk. Keeping together all of the best parts of what makes a Windwalker, a Brewmaster, and a Mistweaver, and keeping a lot of that familiarity, but just refining it to be even better than ever before, allowing Windwalkers to kind of detach themselves from Zuen and focus on raw damage output as the master of martial arts, for Brewmasters to actually have a bit more self-healing and even share in that self-healing goodness with the rest of the party, and also finding ways to refine Mistweaver to better focus on the range healing and fist weaving, but also trying to make both those playstyles better than ever before. So for today's video, I want to go over exactly everything that's happening to the class of Monk in the Midnight Alpha so far, though out of all the classes, it seems like this one is probably going through the most amount of changes with every single build, so wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these talents and certain nodes got changed or revamped or swapped out completely over the next few weeks. With that being said, though, if you guys want to keep up with regular class updates as we're heading into Midnight Beta, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe, but otherwise, let's dive right in. So, as usual, let's start off with the hero talents first, where we see actually a fairly big number of new changes, starting with the Conduit of Celestials. The Conduit playstyle is going to function a little bit differently with Windwalker and Mistweaver. For Windwalker, they're taking away your Zuen and are adding it to the Conduit of Celestial playstyle instead. So now to be able to invoke Zuen every 2 minutes, you are going to be picking up Conduit of Celestials, though you can further shorten the cooldown of Zuen, but it becomes part of the Conduit playstyle as they're detaching Zuen to make Windwalker less complex, but also trying to make Windwalker be built about less reasons for you to have to play with Zuen. So it's kind of like a good thing or a bad thing. If it's not great if you're someone who's just used to running Zuen, because it feels like a core component is now ripped away and put into a hero talent. The good thing about it, though, is the simplicity of Windwalker has improved greatly because of this change, and it still allows Conduit to be a very, very powerful cooldown to play with. Now, with the Conduit of Celestials, you're basically going to use Zuen, and then it lets you use Conduit while Zuen is active. So you summon Zuen, it transforms into a Conduit ability, and then you get to follow it up. It does not allow you to use Conduit separately, so there are some uses where in PvP you would want to use it separately, specifically for some of that CC protection. But for PvE content, for the most part, it's not going to make that big a difference. For your healer spec, you also will be able to use Conduit once you summon your Celestial, whether it is Yulon or whether it is Chi-Ji. But just like with Zuen, you first need to summon the Celestial and then you can use the Conduit ability. So the same mechanic applies there as well. Outside of this, there was also a couple of other new talents in the right-hand side, as they basically structured the right hand to be this Yulon tree, using some of the tier sets from the Koresh update of War Within, and including those bonuses in here, with Yulon's avatar, where Heart of the Jade Serpent additional triggers for 4 seconds at 100% effectiveness after you cast Zenith, or after you cast Vivify or Shaylun's Gift. So this has a different proc depending on your spec, but after you cast like a trigger ability, then you also get more uses out of Heart of the Jade Serpent. Below that is Flown Wisdom. Heart of the Jade Serpent also increases your haste by 10%, which is going to be pretty good for both of those specs, since they also utilize haste in various ways. Finally, we also have a trait of Path of the Falling Star, which gives you more single target potential. Celestial Conduit's healing and damage is increased by 100% when striking a single target, though each additional target reduces the bonus of the ability by 20%. The Conduit Celestial ability already has a decent bit of AoE component behind it, like you do quite a lot of damage with this ability in AoE, but now it has more single target value. I'm not a huge fan of talents like this, unfortunately, though. Like, Outlaw Rogues and Assassination Rogues had a talent with like Fatebound, where coin flips were more effective when you're striking a single target, but became weaker the more enemies were nearby. This was perfectly good for pure single target fights, but just made that single target and overall damage feel weaker in AoE. Though the coin for rogues only did single target damage, so it felt bad to lose out on it, where Conduit does do AoE damage, so I guess it just gains a bit more value in pure single targets, so there it may be pretty good. I just don't like how abilities like lose value the more targets they are. Just not a big fan of those talents specifically, but potentially Conduit will be tuned into such a way where this talent won't really be too bad and potentially just overall better in smaller group content. Another hero spec that's gone through some grid changes actually is Shadow Pan, with a whole new set of talents on the right hand side. Shadow over the battlefield, flurry strikes will deal additional nature damage to all enemies in front of you, so this is them taking that what used to be part of the Wisdom of the Wall capstone, which changed a little, and are adding this AoE component into it naturally. Below that is Stand Ready, where activating a special ability, being Zenith or Nuizawa depending on your spec, instantly grants you 10 stacks of flurry that will trigger you on your next immediate attack, which is pretty awesome. Basically the Koresh tier set included as a talent, which is super effective. And below that is Weapons Off the Wall, where flurry charge generation is increased by 50% during major cooldowns, being Zenith or Nuizawa as Brewmaster. They also did redesign Flurry Strikes, so now it procs the charges from auto attacks, where the auto attacks have a chance to generate 1 to 2 charges, but anytime you activate a very specific activation ability, being Fist of Fury or Kick Smash, it unleashes all those charges immediately. So you have more consistent way for you to unleash those charges instead of having to wait until you spend a set amount of energy using certain trigger abilities to proc them more regularly, which is actually really good change that'll make the Flurry Strikes damage output a lot more consistent. So this is actually a really good design. Wisdom of the Wall, however, has also been reworked as well, using those abilities like Nuizawa and Zenith to further empower them. Using a special ability grants you a buff. Food Moonwalker using Zenith causes Rising Sun Kick and Spinning Crane Kick to launch 3 Flurry Strikes, so you get a lot of immediate value from Shadow Pan. And for Brewmaster, using Nuizawa, it causes your Breath of Fire to also launch 3 Flurry Strikes immediately at your target. Finally, we have Master of Harmony, where they're essentially doing the tier set from Koresh and are applying that to the new set of talents over on the right hand side, so a lot of familiar talents are going to pop up here as well. From Harmonic Surge, where casting your Brew or your Tea, depending on your spec, guarantees that your next 2 casts of Tiger Palm or Vivify will proc Harmonic Surge, doing a lot of AoE damage or healing, so it is adjusted to work both for healing spec or as well as a Brewmaster spec, but also there's opportunity for fist weaving for healers as well. Potential Energy is the talent below that, where casting Kick Smash or Rising Sun Kick as a healer guarantees that your next Tiger Palm or Vivify will cause a Harmonic Surge. It being tied to those basic core abilities means you get quite a lot of value from Harmonic Surge pretty generally. Below that is a talent which unfortunately is named Zenith, which is also a cooldown for Moonwalker named Zenith. They need to really do a little bit of like changes to some of the names for these things, because I think when you have multiple talents and abilities named the same thing, that could get really confusing. But for Master of Harmony, talent of Zenith, it actually grants you a different effect depending on your spec. For Brewmaster, it actually empowers 1 of 2 talents which are a choice node, either a better version of Blackout Combo, which increases Tiger Palm damage by an additional 50%, and Kick Smash further reduces the cooldown of your brews by additional 1 second, which is pretty strong, or if you play with Press Advantage instead, the nature damage from your main hand auto attacks is increased further by 50%, and now it helps reduce the cooldown of your brews by additional 0.25 seconds. So it empowers whatever talent choice you make, but also encourages you to go into that talent choice node as a Master Harmony specifically, and I think this is the first time I've seen a talent that further empowers like a spec talents in such a way where like both talents are empowered. I think this is actually the first time they've done something like this, and I'm surprised they haven't done more talents like this for hero specs so far. For Mistweaver, it actually takes a second to find out what this buff is, but their version of Zenith empowers Ancient Teachings, causing to transfer an additional 50% damage to healing. So it encourages for Master Harmony Mistweavers to be very much a melee healer focused spec, or lets you incorporate melee healing through Tiger Palm and combat abilities. So this could potentially make some very fun and powerful playstyles like this Fist Weaver Mistweavers in the future. From there, we can move on to the class talent tree, and unfortunately Monk's talent trees in a class tree are still very busy, which is not a bad thing specifically, but they are basically have gotten barely any changes from the get-go, which is going to be unusual to say the least. But they only gained like 3 new talents specifically, and some of those talents are going to be things like Still Step Coil, where Leg Sweep will apply Disable for 5 seconds to targets when the stun effect ends. So if you're looking to lock enemies down and slow them afterwards, that could potentially be pretty good as well. We also have Silent Sanctuary, which is interesting. While no enemies are within 15 yards of you, you'll heal for a portion of spell power every 3 seconds. So you have like a second wind type of mechanic for this spec as long as the enemies are not nearby, which maybe could be good for like recovery. Maybe could be good if you get to disengage for a second or can stay away from enemies. I think for Mistweavers, this could be valuable, especially if you're playing as a more ranged healer rather than a melee healer specifically. You also get a new talent of Reinvigoration, where after dispelling an effect using Detox, you also grant the ally movement speed for a short bit for 5 seconds, which could be really nice, and I kind of like this talent and how it bakes in some additional utility into a Dispel. Additionally, as a Mistweaver, you also get another new choice node here, specifically being either Jade Infusion or summon Jade Serpent Statue. It basically just allows you to give you an option of how you proc Jade Serpent Statue. You can either go with Jade Infusion, where Thunder Focus automatically summons a Jade Serpent Statue that functions exactly the same, allowing you to, copy a second Soothing Mist to a ally over 8 seconds, or you just get to pre-place a statue using a global for that specifically. So this could be good, like if let's say you're doing enough movement where you just want to automatically drop a statue while using Thunder Focus, that could be good because you could follow up with a massive heal right after. Or if you just want to pre-place a statue and move it manually yourself, you can do so as well. It's just more of a convenience talent more than anything. Now, for the spec talents, I'm actually going to do it a little bit differently. Normally, I do it strictly alphabetically, but this time around, I'm actually going to go by the numbers of players that play all of these different specs. And the Windwalker population numbers have definitely grown over the past few patches of War Within specifically. Therefore, I am going to start this video, or this part, the spec trees, off with the Windwalker, then go to Brewmaster and Mistweaver afterwards. For Windwalker, their biggest change is the fact that they no longer have Storm, Earth, and Fire. It is now replaced with a major offensive ability called Zenith, which essentially functions very similarly as a buff with its own set of cooldowns, very similar to Storm, Earth, and Fire. The problem with SEF, Storm, which I'm going to just go in full, I'm going to call it all in full, Storm, Earth, and Fire, is controlling those NPCs that you spawn with Storm, Earth, and Fire that were not always consistent. They've had for years, multiple expansions now, bugs after bugs that cause them to function erratically, and relying on those NPCs, especially when they're not consistent for damage, it's not a great combo. So it looks like they're finally replacing it with a different ability altogether, which is probably good for Windwalkers to be weaned away from those things. I think the Storm, Earth, and Fire can definitely have some big value if you're looking to cleave multiple enemies, especially at longer distances with some PvE or PvP content, which there's advantages there specifically, but I think having some sort of a buff to empower all of your combat abilities instead of relying on NPCs for damage is probably good for just more raw consistency. What Zenith does, however, is very different than Storm, Earth, and Fire. Has a 1.5 minute recharge with 2 charges available immediately. Chi costs are reduced by 1 while Zenith is active, and Blackout Kick reduces the cooldown of affected abilities by an additional 1 second, allowing you to gain better cooldown reduction and changes how you end up spending your chi. Activating Zenith also resets the remaining cooldown of Rising Sun Kick and grants you immediately 2 chi, so it kind of unlocks your combat potential immediately with this ability. But the actual talent of Zenith could be further empowered, which is really where you get a lot of value from it. Like you can go Drink It Horn Cover to extend the duration, or Spiritual Focus to actually further reduce its cooldown, giving you very different cooldown timings, but it gives you a ton of flexibility, so you're not really a 1.5 minute class anymore. It's like a closer to like a 1.3 or so, but it basically allows you to have a burst cooldown every minute if that's how you want to play your monk. Further, you can go with Obsidian Spiral, where during Zenith, a Blackout Kick can actually generate your chi instead of spending chi, so it changes your whole like rotational value altogether. Further down, we'll have talents like Weapons of Wind, where your damage during Zenith actually gains a damage increase by 10%. Further, with Martial Agility, you get a auto attack speed buff, and that auto attack speed buff is doubled during Zenith, giving you even more overall raw damage. Some of the other things to note here is Strike of the Windlord and Whirling Dragon Punch are now a choice node competing against one another. Strike of the Windlord for the most part is basically the same. It costs 2 chi with a 35-second cooldown, and so is Whirling Dragon Punch of 35-second cooldown, but it doesn't have the chi cost, though it does need to have both Fist of Fury and Rising Sun Kick to be on cooldown to be used. But a lot of the other talents that usually do empower, like Strike of the Windlord, will now empower Whirling Dragon Punch in the same value as well. So it actually gives you like double the dipping of the talents for either one of those abilities that now you can play into, which is pretty awesome. You also added some brand new talents for monks with some great capability. Like monks always had like really good AoE damage profile and a single target damage profile, but cleaving smaller groups of enemies usually was weird, and in some cases like the ability of Rising Sun Kick was almost not really used in AoE unless you want to, you know, proc it just for a Whirling Dragon Punch, but sometimes you will like just not use the ability, and I want to find a way to encourage you to use your Rising Sun Kick more regularly in more AoE and cleave situations. So Russian Wind Kick is an ability that becomes available after consuming Blackout Kick proc. Rising Sun Kick has a 40% chance to become a Russian Wind Kick, which deals pure nature damage to all enemies in front of you. Damage is split amongst those targets, but the damage is further increased for every target it hits, so it has some cleave AoE potential, but also a lot of single target value as well. Then we also have Sky Fire Heal, which makes it even better as a cleave ability. Rising Sun Kick critical strike chance is increased for every enemy around you up to 5 enemies max. 10% of Rising Sun Kick's damage splashes onto nearby enemies with a soft cap of 5 targets, which is also pretty awesome. And the gameplay overall for Windwalker monks remains largely unchanged. Windwalker feels simpler to play and even easier to manage than ever before. So none of these changes are there to help complicate the spec, but rather to empower it and make it just better in more forms of content. Your Apex talent is an old school callback to Miss Pandaria version, though not quite, with Tiger Eye Brew, though it does have some big value. While in combat, you gain Tiger Eye Brew stacks every 8 seconds, causing your critical strike chance to be increased by 2%. During your next Zenith, you consume up to all these stacks. Now, for the Apex talent, we do have a callback from Pandaria of Tiger Eye Brew, though it functions a little bit differently than the original version. While in combat, you gain Tiger Eye Brew every 8 seconds, causing your critical strike chance to be increased by 2% during your next use of Zenith, with every single stack converted into 2% more crit. Stacks up to 20 times overall. However, you can generate up to 10 stacks really quickly while out of combat. So anytime you start a fight, you'll start with 10 stacks immediately, which results in 20% increased critical strike chance whenever you pop Zenith off the get-go. Your next trait actually increases your critical strike damage, so now you have crit damage scaling as a monk. And previously you had talents that gave you some crit scaling potential in the past, but you got even more crit scaling than ever before with Tiger's Eye Brew, which is actually pretty awesome. Your final trait gives you a chance equal to your critical strike chance to increase the damage of your Fist of Fury by 15% each time it deals damage, which can give Fist of Fury some real big ramp up value. From there, we get to move on to Brewmaster Monks, which very similar to Windwalkers, like the core gameplay of Brewmaster isn't changing too much. However, what I did notice looking through some of the talents, which there's a lot of familiar options over in the talent tree all throughout, like some of the early nodes, they're just in slightly different locations, is they're actually focusing on quite a decent bit of damage increases for Brewmasters when it comes to increasing the fire damage, but also nature damage through a number of talents. And some of these combos really do look awesome. One of those talents being a new version of Jade Flash. Crackling Jade Lightning deals its damage in 75% less time, costs less energy, and strikes 4 additional targets, but has a 60-second cooldown, so now you can use it as like a chain AoE ability every minute, and it actually should do decent bit of overall nature damage. They also updated how Celestial Flames work to work off of Special Delivery and Russian Jade Wind, where drinking from brews there's a 30% chance to coat you in Celestial Flames for 6 seconds, and while those flames are active, Special Delivery deals additional fire damage, while Russian Jade Wind converts into a firestorm, which adds additional damage. When playing into Breath of Fire, which you actually are encouraged to play Breath of Fire now with certain hero talent options, picking up the talent of Dragonfire Brew, this talent no longer causes your Breath of Fire damage to scale with stagger. It's just a raw damage increase instead, which right now results in a fairly sizable fire damage buff for Brewmaster as of this moment. With the talent of Exploding Keg, you also could deal additional fire damage. The ability got an updated icon, but it also got a couple of new capstone talents to go with it, with Exploding Keg being a big capstone option. You either have Fuel in the Fire, where Exploding Keg also causes your next 2 casts of Keg Smash to summon a whirl of flame that spirals out, dealing attack power fire damage to each enemy struck, or Empty the Cellar, where Exploding Keg can be activated again within 20 seconds to throw 5 additional kegs at nearby enemies, dealing physical damage instead, but reduces the cooldown of your brews by 0.5 seconds. You can also pick up the talent of Keg Volley to empower Exploding Keg to reset the cooldown of Keg Smash as well, which could be a fantastic option for both damage but also defensively as well. Now, the reason why monks are getting so many cool new fire and nature damage increases, and there's even more of them throughout the talent tree, but more familiar options that we've seen in the past, is because of new options within the talents, such as Vital Flame, where now monks can actually heal for 50% of all damage, fire or nature damage that's dealt to you through your spells and abilities. So the more nature and fire damage you do, you actually start to heal yourself based on that damage done, which gives you yet another source of constant continuous damage the harder you hit your foes, which is actually pretty awesome. Of course, if you are not looking for a nature and a fire damage type of gameplay, you could go with Awakened Spirit, where Purifying Brew surrounds you with the protective energies for 15 seconds. While staggered damage would be dealt to you, it instead gets absorbed up until a certain amount has been prevented, which allows you to offset stagger in a whole new way. Also to note with these set of talents is Neozao has been moved on to the right hand side as more of a capstone choice, which synergizes pretty well with, I believe it is Shadowpan. It is required for Shadowpan playstyle specifically, but Neozao is basically the same Ox he used to be. You also get Heart of the Ox, which increases your mastery, double this bonus whenever Neozao is active, and Neozao can do the Mighty Stomp, knocking enemies into the sky, but he no longer feels like a really cornerstone mandatory option unless you pick certain hero talents for every single build of Monk going forward. However, the core loop of Brewmaster is basically to continue to stagger damage and manage and stagger, throw in Keg Smash pretty much on cooldown, blackout kicking, and using Purifying Brew as part of your basic rotation. Though you now have a lot less CD management, specifically from abilities like Dampen Harm or Diffuse Magic, and instead it's been offset for you to opt into to go into more heal-oriented talents, like we mentioned earlier with some of the fire and nature damage, or possibly offsetting the brew damage. So there's definitely a change in design for Brewmaster, which helps simplify it, but also should give it a little bit more, hopefully, consistency rather than having to time cooldowns. You are just focusing on maintaining your health at all times, which should hopefully make him a little bit more self-sustainable and self-healable. Now, their Apex talent is hilarious because I feel like it just fits the fantasy completely. It is called Bring Me Another. Drinking a brew has a 20% chance to leave you with an empty barrel, which is tossed along with the next Keg Smash to deal additional physical damage. The physical damage can be further increased, and empty barrels can now ricochet to hit more targets, though at a slightly reduced value, so even more output there as well. Bring Me Another final trait is whenever you cast Fortifying Brew or Celestial Infusion, you tap a fresh keg, granting yourself and 2 nearby allies a refreshing drink, but also leaving you with an empty barrel. With Refreshing Drink, upon taking damage, you will automatically consume Refreshing Drink to heal for a pretty decent bit of healing over 8 seconds. So it gives some party healing, gives some personal healing, and I like how it spreads this healing component with the rest of your allies too. Very much a Brewmaster, kind of wacky little Apex talent, but I'm a huge fan of it, and it continues to add to more self-healing components of a Brewmaster, which I actually really like to hear about. Now, for Mistweaver, we're not really seeing too many major talent changes, though there are some components, core components, that are looking to adjust the way that monks play and some of their focus going forward. Again, like Brewmaster and Moonwalker, not necessarily changing the formula, but rather trying to find a way to enhance the existing formulas. One of those ways is through a new talent called Misty Coalescence, which is a pretty core ability from the jump, where Renewing Mist can have his healing be increased by up to 300% based on how many allies have this healing over time effect. So the more mist you can spread, the more healing the ability does. And it looks like Mistweaver, for the most part, is starting to transition into a playstyle where you still always wanted to spread as many mists as possible, but you did it for a different reason. They want you to spread as many mists as possible to buff the effectiveness of those mists, where previously those mists were there as a primer for you to use things like Invigorating Mist, where when you hit Vivify, it also hits your allies or Renewing Mist for a portion of the value. So it basically would coat the entire raid in a Renewing Mist, which is fine, and then spam Vivify to do big AoE healing, but Mist was there to prime the Invigorating Mist instead. But now it looks like you might be able to play into a playstyle where just spreading Mist is a lot of healing by itself, so you don't need to rely on that chain nearly as heavily, but really depends on how you build your monk within talents as well. Another major change we have is actually Shaylun's Gift and Vivify, which now serve basically the same purpose, and there's a lot of talents that now work off of Vivify or Shaylun's Gift. When you pick up Shaylun's Gift, it replaces Vivify, so instead of having like an emergency big heal that has all these chain combos that you can play into, Shaylun's Gift can now take up that role. But also it allows Vivify to allow to any buffs that worked off of Shaylun's Gift previously now also will affect Vivify. So like say you're playing Conduit, you can either proc some of the effects through Gift or Vivify. So if you don't want to play into a major, heavier, longer cooldown of Shaylun's Gift, you don't necessarily have to. This is a pretty major change for monks in general, and it seems like a very small thing, but I think it'll have a pretty big consequence in terms of like the endgame meta and some of that build crafting. But Vivify does big healing and has no target caps anymore, so they made Vivify by itself a fairly effective heal. But Shaylun is just a more punchy version with a slightly over CD. It doesn't necessarily have a cooldown, but it works off of mists that are generated while the ability is active, so you need to let those mists accumulate for a while before you can really get full value of out of the ability. But there's a bunch of also talents that can further empower it, but it's really interesting to see what they're doing with Shaylun's and Vivify specifically for you to create some really insane big healing situations, and I think this could be a fairly consequential change long term. Another thing that I kind of like is them being able to allow monks to choose from the jump what type of a build they want to play into, with either Way of the Serpent or Way of the Crane, which kind of sets up what build you're playing, like as a rage healer or as a melee healer. Way of the Serpent allows you Soothing Mist and Crackling Jade Lightning to not be channeled while on the move, but your movement speed is reduced by 40% while channeling, but it gives you more mobility. Both Shaylun's Gift and Vivify healing is increased by 15%, and Renew Mist healing is increased by 30%, so it allows you to really focus in on rage healing and the combos of Renew Mist and Vivify such Shaylun as a range healer. But Way of the Crane transforms your healing playstyle into more of a Fist Weaver. Target Bombs always strike twice, that gives you a bunch of procs and resources. Blackout Kick strike an additional 2 targets for better cleave, but also healing. And Spinning Crane Kick will now heal 3 nearby allies for a portion of the damage done. So it immediately allows you to kind of set yourself into a Fist Weaver or a range healer from the jump, but still give you the flexibility of like whether you want to go with Invoke Yulon or Chi-Ji, and later down the line for some of those other talents like Wish and Wind Kick or Jade Fire Teaching. So it still gives you like a portion of that main mechanic, but it still allows you customizability to adjust your build and fine tune it better to how you want to play, which I think is pretty awesome too. Though as for gameplay changes, very similar to Brewmaster and Windwalker, you're not seeing too many crazy changes. There is definitely a lot less tracking that is going to be necessary with weak auras and add-ons. You are creating an easier fist-weaving playstyle since abilities like Jade Fire Stomp and Teachings are now more passive, which is really good for Mythic Plus, and it allows monks to no longer have to like stand in that Jade Fire Stomp green lines area in order to be effective. You can kind of just stand wherever you want to, which is super nice. The talent of Mystical Lessons and the whole change to how Renew and Mist functions and the healing over time, healing buffs, seems like a very good direction for the spec as well, just allowing those HOTS to be more effective by themselves instead of just being a pure primer for yet another ability, which means less of a ramp up, and just maintaining those HOTS is like pretty huge amount of healing overall. This is still a work in progress though, as it does look like Mistweaver has been going through a number of changes, and even this week they've got through like yet another set of changes, so I wouldn't be surprised if a portion of these talents or some of these builds, or maybe a good portion of them, all of them basically, see some kind of a redesign and a bit of a rework over the next few weeks. Now, their Apex talent is a little bit more passive and a little bit more RNG, but it doesn't seem to be too bad on paper. It is called Spirit Font. Rising Sun Kick and Vivify, but also I guess Shaylun's Gift in a sense, have a chance to activate Spirit Font, causing the next Envelop Mist to then channel Soothe the Mist onto 5 allies at 50% effectiveness for 8 seconds. However, if a Spirit Font is already healing a healthy target, it then kind of chain heal jumps to a secondary target just to make sure it doesn't waste any value, and this process happens automatically more than anything. The next trait allows Rising Sun Kick damage to be increased, Envelop Mist healing to be increased, and these bonuses are further increased while a Spirit Font is currently active. And the final trait allows Thunder Focus Tea to activate Spirit Font every single time you use it, and also Spirit Font applies Chi Cocoons at 50% effectiveness to all allies targeted. So Spirit Font seems to be more of like a passive way to add additional healing, and you kind of want to chain Spirit Fonts, and the fact that you can activate Spirit Font with a Thunder Focus Tube fairly regularly makes certain hero specs like Master Harmony potentially really strong. But it also does allow you to have this like window where your healing is further increased if you want to play Fist Weaver or a Cast Weaver. Either one of those things work pretty well, and there seems to be some consistency with Spirit Font. I think this one may be good in the future. It really will come down to how well it's tuned, but it seems to be kind of like a passive option rather than an active component for Mistweavers going forward compared to what some of the other healers have gotten. But with that being said, as always, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys did enjoy this Monk class update. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like, as I would very much appreciate it. Also, be sure to join our Discord community, especially if you want to keep up with some of the upcoming content, be it Legion Remix, War Within next patch of 11.27, or Midnight Beta, which is coming out oh so soon. As always, I would want to hear all of you guys' thoughts in the comments down below, and with that, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.